So you guys know the drill there. Seems to be a pattern developing. I'll release a long form episode and then I go, oh, I better release a short one too. So here we go. I probably shouldn't be laughing. This is going to be a gruesome one. I was being a masochist, subjecting myself to yet another episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored when I noticed someone in the comments mention a story about 70 Christians supposedly being beheaded. It was the first I had heard anything about it, so I did a quick Google search to try to verify whether it was true or not, and unfortunately, horrifically, it appears it is. There was a long list of articles about it from various reputable media outlets. It's such a shocking story that my first instinct was that I should talk about it on the show. After all, what I do on this show is, at least in part, talk about news stories having to do with religion. I did momentarily second guess myself a bit, wondering if it would be in bad taste to cover it, if I would just be covering it for the shock value. But it is a legitimate news story, and I think people need to know about stuff like this so we can denounce it and shine a light on it, as limited as my reach is. And it doesn't matter to me what the faith of the victims are or is. The barbaric destruction of human life is the barbaric destruction of human life. I denounce the horrific actions of Hamas on October 7th. I continue to denounce the sweeping death, destruction, and displacement being wrought by Israeli forces in Gaza. And I denounce this, the brutal killing of 70 human beings. The main source I'm drawing from is a Newsweek article dated February 20th, in which they state the victims had been killed a few days after having been kidnapped on the 12th. And this occurred in Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The bodies were found in a Protestant church in the town of Kasanga, in the Lubero territory in the province of North Kivu. The incident was reported by an organization known as Open Doors, a group dedicated to supporting persecuted Christians around the world. Apparently, no group has officially claimed responsibility yet, but according to quote-unquote field sources, Open Doors and others believe it was an African group affiliated with ISIS known as the ADF. And here's a quote from a Pan-African news agency. Local sources suspect the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, an Islamist group of Ugandan origin affiliated with the Islamic State, as well as local armed groups, of being responsible for the massacre. These groups have maintained a climate of terror in the region for several months. And here's where it mentions the date that the victims were supposedly kidnapped. February 12th. It, meaning the news agency, had said the victims had been tied up and decapitated with knives. I can't even imagine that, so I don't know if they kept all the victims together as they systematically dispatched them, shall we say. That must have been just a horrible atmosphere to spend your last moments in. Yeah. But there's a part of the Newsweek article entitled The Context. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has been in a nearly continuous state of war and conflict for more than 3 decades, but violence has surged recently, namely with the advancement of the March 23rd movement, M23, which has captured strategic locations, including the cities of Goma and Bukavu. ADF is another rebel group involved in the violence. One of the reasons Ugandan forces were recently deployed to eastern Congo to help Congolese troops. And for further context, I looked it up, and apparently the March 23 movement, as already stated, abbreviated as M23, is also known as the Congolese Revolutionary Army, and they're a Congolese Tutsi-led rebel paramilitary group. And I was able to find out a little bit more about the ADF from the DNI.gov website, and DNI is Director of National Intelligence, right? And so it says, ISIS Democratic Republic of Congo, also called ISIS Central Africa, locally known as the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, is one of the deadliest militant groups in eastern Congo. The group began as an anti-governmental insurgency in Uganda and was publicly recognized by ISIS leaders in Syria as an ISIS branch in 2019. And it goes on to explain that they follow ISIS's strict interpretation of Islamic law and aim to extend ISIS's self-proclaimed caliphate into Central Africa. And it says operating areas primarily North Kivu and Ituri provinces. Hopefully my attempted pronunciations of these place names aren't too far off. And it says they also conduct attacks in Uganda and are thought to have in between 500 to 1,500 members. And so if you're a regular listener or viewer, you'll know that I'm not a believer. So I have no religious skin in this game or a sense of religious tribalism. I'm just sickened by this atrocity in general as a human being. And I just mentioned the word tribalism. I think that's what it always comes down to. Killing people because they're the wrong religion, the wrong ethnicity, they're on the wrong piece of land or a piece of land you want, or they don't see the world the same way you do. And I think sadly it's in our nature to be tribalistic. And I think the only way to combat tribalism, it reminds me of, I think it's Peter Singer, has a book called The Expanding Circle. Yeah, here's a little blurb from Amazon. In his classic study, The Expanding Circle, Peter Singer argues that altruism began as a genetically based drive to protect one's kin and community members, but has developed into a consciously chosen ethic with an expanding circle of moral concern. And I don't know if it's pie in the sky, I don't know if it's possible or if we'll ever get there, but I hope, I like to dream that maybe someday, the circle will continue expanding to the point where we all view each other as members of the same in-group, the same human family, and we recognize our common humanity. Sadly, I don't think all this bloodshed, the constant ghastly parade of atrocities we see in the news, is going to go away anytime soon. I think all we can do is try to be decent ourselves and try to do what little we can to be a light in the darkness, as corny as that might sound. But that's all I've got. Yeah, I know it's a really dark story, but thanks for listening, and hopefully the next one won't be quite as heavy, the real world violence and all that. I'll skip the shameless plugs, doesn't really seem appropriate, so until next time, brothers and sisters.